All right, folks, thank you very much. A lot of people have registered for tonight's webinar, but we'll start up now. We will be sending out at the end of this event the recording and the slides for everyone who registered, whether they attended or not. But we thank you for joining with us on a beautiful evening. So tonight's webinar is called Truth to Power. Increasingly over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of misinformation and disinformation about clean energy and fossil fuels, and it's really dangerous. To define terms, misinformation is if you think you read something or heard something from a friend or whatever that's incorrect, and you spread that in some way to another person on Facebook or at a barbecue, and it's false information, but you didn't know that. That's what we call misinformation, and there's a lot of that. But usually, the misinformation is driven or spurred on or sparked by disinformation, and that is the deliberate spreading of falsehoods. And we have seen across the spectrum of energy issues that the disinformation is becoming incredibly cost effective. The fossil fuel industry, and sometimes utilities, and sometimes politicians, if you can believe that, will spread disinformation on purpose in the hopes that misinformation will then take it from there and it'll be multiplied in its effect. And we've kind of had it with that here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, because we know that clean energy is better all around for society. It's affordable, it's healthy, it creates good jobs and choices for consumers, and that's the truth. We're going to tell the story tonight. We're going to try to point out the misinformation, disinformation, and talk to you about some of the truths, just so you can be better prepared when you're at a barbecue or you're posting something on Facebook or you see something on Facebook. But if you're here, you're probably 95% of you are probably on the same page as we are, but here we are. We're trying to empower you with some information. Next slide, please. So here we are, Green Energy Consumers Alliance. That's a great group of board and staff. We're a nonprofit organization. If you didn't know, we're based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island with offices in Boston and Providence. And we have a mission, and every word here is important to us, to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. Next slide, please. So here we are. I have brought to you a panel of the best and brightest in me, and we're going to have Anna Vanderspeck, our electric vehicle program director, Amanda Barker, our Clean Energy Program Coordinator. Carrie Catan is our Massachusetts Policy Advocate, and Tina Munter, our Rhode Island Policy Advocate. That seems to be cut off on my screen, but we're all here, and our email addresses are there. Depending upon what we say, you can contact any one of us. First name at greenenergyconsumers.org. Next slide. So the basics, sorry, but you're going to be muted throughout the webinar. We will answer questions at the end of the presentation. Use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask the questions, and we'll look at those at the end. We'll take them at the end. If you'd like to use closed captions, you can click CC at the bottom of your screen. And again, we'll send the slides and recording to you after the webinar. Next slide. So today's agenda. I've already explained the difference between disinformation and misinformation, but now we're going to get into specifics. Offshore wind, electric vehicles, energy cost in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And then we've got a special action alert. I wonder what that is. We'll get into that at the end. And then we're going to open it up for questions. Now, I've got some of the smartest people in the world on energy issues, and we're going to take them one at a time, but then there's an opportunity for staff to buzz in if they want to add something to what one of their colleagues has said. So we'll kick it off with a discussion about offshore wind. Amanda, is there a lot of misinformation and disinformation about offshore wind?
There certainly is, which is what I will be talking to you all about tonight. So, first, I want to just explain why offshore wind is so critical to New England. We often hear people say that they want renewable energy and they want to do something about climate change, but there are better ways to meet our energy needs than offshore wind. And I want to very clearly say that that is not true. Um, this graphic on the right is from a Brattle report on New England's total clean energy potential. And it found that offshore wind makes up over half of all the renewable energy available to harness across New England. And it really makes the most sense for our region of all of the clean energy sources. You know, we have extremely high demand along our coasts. We have some of the strongest winds in the entire world right off of our coasts. And we also have shallow waters, which is ideal for turbine installation. So offshore wind is really, without question, the biggest lever that we can pull to decarbonize our electricity here in New England. Next slide. So now to get into some of the disinformation that we've been hearing about offshore wind. Currently, Rhode Island and Massachusetts are working to get their first large-scale offshore wind projects over the finish line. That's Vineyard Wind and Revolution Wind. And unfortunately, fossil fuel interests are working behind the scenes to push back. We have seen several so-called local offshore wind opposition groups pop up, often repeating talking points from the fossil fuel industry. These groups use emotional narratives about whales and fisheries while ignoring the impact of oil and gas extraction on marine life. So we want to encourage you to be really mindful about what you're hearing and where the information is coming from. So we've provided a list of helpful resources if you're interested in learning more on how to combat disinformation and misinformation. This first resource is Against the Wind. It's a report by the Brown Climate and Development Lab. And in it, there's a great map showing how some local anti-wind groups are actually connected to conservative think tanks that are fueled by the fossil fuel industry. The second resource, Real Offshore Wind, is a really helpful website where scientists and academics answer frequently asked questions about offshore wind. False Rumors in the Wind is a great article that addresses disinformation being spread by offshore wind opponents. What's Up with Offshore Wind webinar series is a great three-part webinar put on by the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. And it really goes into depth on disinformation and how to best address disinformation. Then I also linked an article from the Providence Journal that explains that scientists have found absolutely no link between offshore wind and whale deaths. And then lastly, just today, there was an op-ed posted by the Dean of Brown University's School of Public Health, pointing out that local clean energy is crucial for improving public health. And in this op-ed, they talked about how in Massachusetts, more than 95% of air pollution comes from the burning of fossil fuels. And so a shift to 100% clean electricity, as well as electric vehicles, which my colleague Anna will talk to you all about in a second, that shift could really save Massachusetts $14.7 billion in health costs. It could prevent over 28,000 asthma attacks and avoid 1,350 premature deaths over a 30-year period. So this really is not just about combating climate change. It's about public health. It's about jobs. It's about improving the local economy. There are really so many benefits. The list goes on and on of all the benefits that offshore wind can bring to our region and to our states.
But Amanda, if there's no link between whale deaths and offshore wind, why are some people saying that there are links between them? Do you think?
We are finding that that is a fossil fuel industry talking point that is intentionally being spread. That is a clear example of disinformation that local groups are picking up and using to try and combat offshore wind from being developed.
Okay, that's bad. Go ahead.
So I want to tell you what the science actually says. So again, there is no evidence linking offshore wind to whale deaths. Marine scientists have debunked that. Um, I also want to say that organizations like the National Wildlife Federation, oceanographers at the University of Rhode Island, and lifelong marine scientists all support offshore wind because they recognize that climate change is the biggest threat to marine life. Studies have also shown that offshore wind can actually benefit marine life. Turbines can act as artificial reefs, which are shown in these images here, where they can actually create habitat for fish and other marine life. And studies have shown that there's actually a higher abundance of fish near wind farms compared to surrounding areas. And, I've heard from recreational fishermen in Rhode Island that they actually go right up to the Black Island Wind Farm and fish right off the side of the turbines because they know that fish have taken up habitat in that structure there, and they're more likely to catch fish right off the side of the turbine. So with that, I just really want to underscore that saying no to offshore wind is saying yes to more natural gas plants polluting the air we breathe. It's saying yes to more gas pipelines, and it's saying yes to the catastrophic impacts of climate change, which includes warming oceans and acidification that have a profound impact on marine life. So offshore wind is really the biggest lever that we can pull to mitigate climate change and to protect marine life in the process. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague Anna to talk to you all about electric vehicle misinformation.
Thanks, Amanda. So I am coming with two sort of the top misconceptions that we run into when we are out hosting events and talking to people about electric vehicles at Earth Day fairs or community events all across the state. And the first one that we hear a lot is that electric vehicles are just as dirty as gas-powered cars, either because there's so much coal on our grid or because the battery manufacturing takes so much energy. And so the one graphic that I can use to dispel this is this resource from the Union of Concerned Scientists that looks at the life cycle emissions, so from cradle to grave, of gasoline cars versus electric cars and gasoline trucks versus electric trucks. So I'm just going to walk us through this graphic. So the first thing you'll notice is that each one of these bars has an orange slice, and that orange slice is the manufacturing of the vehicle. So these are the greenhouse gas emissions that are the result of the manufacturing of the vehicle. And you can see if you kind of squint that the manufacturing emissions of the vehicle are lower for electric vehicles compared to their gas counterparts. But electric vehicles have an additional slice, which is the blue slice, and that is the greenhouse gas emissions from the manufacturing of the battery. Manufacturing a battery is an energy-intensive process, so the greenhouse gas emissions up front for manufacturing a new gas car or a new new gas car or new gas truck are lower than those of a new electric car or electric truck. But the story obviously does not end there. UCS also looks at the operating emissions of driving those vehicles and what those greenhouse gas emissions look like. So you can see that for each electric vehicle on this graph, the gray bar of the vehicle operation is much smaller for the electric version than the gas. And if you take all of that together for an electric car, UCS found a 52% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over the life of the vehicle. And for electric trucks, it was a 57% reduction. What I want to stress, though, here is that in New England, we've got a much cleaner grid than the national average, and this analysis was done using a national average. So if you were to do the same analysis with the emissions on the grid in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, that emission would be even starker, or the emissions reduction would be even starker. And if you are in one of the many communities across our two states that has a green municipal aggregation program and you opt up to 100% local renewable energy, that goes all the way down to 0 for the vehicle operation. So myth one is that EVs are really dirty. Truth is they're a lot cleaner than gas vehicles. This segues nicely to our next myth, which is that the grid can't handle electric vehicles. We hear this a lot. There's a lot of news about grid issues all across the country, and people see that and think, oh goodness, we're not prepared for that. But the truth is we can be. So first thing to know is that this transition to electric vehicles is gradual. We're not going to suddenly wake up tomorrow and have everybody drive an electric vehicle. And even when we do have everybody drive an electric vehicle, those electric vehicles don't all plug into the grid at once. In fact, electric vehicles load is considered flexible, which means it's easy to shift. If you need to use a microwave, you want to use that microwave when you need food. So that's not very flexible. You're going to use that microwave when you want to have dinner. But with an EV, it doesn't really matter to you when it charges as long as it's ready to go when you need it to be. And so that means that there's a lot of flexibility in when we actually charge those electric vehicles. And we can shift a lot of the demand from electric vehicles to low demand periods. So right now that means overnight when Amanda makes sure we have lots of offshore wind, that'll be extra excellent because electric vehicles can soak up a lot of the generation from offshore wind overnight when other demand is pretty low. And in some places in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, electric vehicles are already serving as batteries through the Connected Solutions programs from our utilities to help smooth out supply and demand. So basically, they're being called on, like other distributed energy resources, to ramp down charging at moments of peak demand. Electric utilities across both states and state agencies are preparing to meet the demand. They're forecasting out, okay, what is electric vehicle adoption going to look like in the coming years? What does that mean for the investments that we need to make in the grid? In Massachusetts, we've got a couple different entities working on that across state agencies. So we have an Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Coordinating Council. We've had a Grid Modernization Advisory Council and procedures or processes at the Department of Public Utilities and with the energy agencies. So this is very top of mind in Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, we're sort of one step behind, but we're getting there. But Rhode Island has been pretty forward thinking and applying for federal funds to build out public charging infrastructure, knowing that there is this demand. But the good news is, again, this is a gradual transition. We've got time to prepare and the relevant entities are working on it. And then lastly, if I were allowed more time, I would have more to say on this, but electric vehicles exert a downward pressure on electricity rates, which means when you look at states all across the country and you look at how much revenue electric vehicle drivers have paid into the electric grid over time versus the costs that they have basically caused by requiring new service or electric vehicle charging stations, that new revenue really exceeds the costs. And this is true in California, where EV adoption is way ahead than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. But it's also true in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Synapse Energy Economics has put out a couple studies where they show you revenue costs, net revenue. And that is a good news story that is not told enough. A lot of people, when they hear electric vehicles and the grid, they think of only the costs, but the benefits far outweigh them even before we think about greenhouse gas emission reduction or public health. So truth on this point is that EVs can help stabilize the grid. We've got time to prepare, and there's a lot of work in motion. So with that, I will pass it right along.
And I have a question. Some countries have much greater EV adoption than Massachusetts and Rhode Island. As far as you know, Norway and the Netherlands and China or California, those jurisdictions that have a lot of EV adoption, is their grid broken as a result of all those EVs?
Not yet. No, I shouldn't say not yet. No, it's not. No, it's not. And the exciting thing that I could also talk about with electric vehicles looking forward is that electric vehicles are giant batteries on wheels. And there are cool pilot programs now of those vehicles discharging electricity back onto the grid in moments of peak demand that we're going to hopefully see more and more of. The Massachusetts Clean Energy Center has a really cool pilot program on that right now. But that is yet another way where EVs can actually serve as a tool to protect the grid moving forward, especially given all the extreme weather events and everything else that we're looking forward to in the next couple of years.
On that last couple of points about the grid, Amanda does, along with Loie Hayes, does webinars about heat pumps. Amanda, are you also hearing that some people worry that the heat pumps are gonna break the grid too? Have you heard that?
We certainly have heard that, and that is not a concern, at least in the immediate future, because right now we have a summer peaking grid where we have enough electricity to supply us when it's really hot and everyone has their ACs on. And so we're essentially just going to shift to a winter peaking grid. But if we have the electricity to be able to supply all of those ACs in the summer, we should have that same electricity to be able to supply heat pumps to heat people's homes in the wintertime.
Yeah, and I just want to be clear, we don't, as an organization, we don't want to discourage consumers from asking a question if they're wondering about the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. If they sincerely don't know and they want to know, that we do want to encourage people to ask questions. What we're concerned about is when is the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So, okay, next slide. I think we're moving on to Carrie. Okay, this relates to what we were just talking about. So go ahead.
Yes, it does. So my name's Carrie Gatan. I do a lot of our Massachusetts building policy work. And so I've definitely heard a lot of misinformation when it comes to this, especially even coming from there was one study that was put out by a group affiliated with MIT that was technically very sound, but they made a lot of very strange assumptions, and they came out with this result of, oh, it's way too expensive to build all electric unless you take away the odd assumptions they make, like they assumed that building all electric still involved hooking up a gas furnace for some reason, which added a few $1,000s in cost. But that's actually just a side note about disinformation in buildings. One really common thing that is heard is it is just too expensive. We cannot electrify all of the homes across the Commonwealth or in Rhode Island. We are going to be using fossil fuels forever. And the honest answer is it actually varies a lot in how much it costs to decarbonize a home. There will be homes where if you switch out their central AC with a heat pump, you have decarbonized that home and it's incredibly cheap. There will be homes that it requires a lot more work. Fortunately, the technologies, heat pump technologies are getting considerably better. And one area where I think the technology is getting really exciting is window-mounted heat pumps that kind of just go in like an AC, but they're a bit beefier and they can handle heating your home in the summer, in the winter. And I think that is really excited because there's always been some homes where they need a lot of really fundamental work to use regular heat pumps, but a window mounted unit, suddenly you don't have to care about the fact that the wall is old or it was built in like 1804 and all of the unique challenges that come from an old housing stock. You can just put something into the window like many homes have been doing for decades. Another thing that's really worth noting is electric heat pumps can beat delivered fuels, so propane and oil, when it comes to price pretty consistently in New England now. And they're getting more competitive with gas costs, partly for reasons we're going to head into in a second. And yeah, as Amanda mentioned before, New England currently is a summer peaking electric grid. So we can add a lot more heat pumps for a while without necessarily overwhelming the grid. Now, it will be a challenge once we do become a winter peaking grid, just because compared to something like EVs, the amount of power it takes to heat homes across the region on those really cold days can be pretty considerable. But in this, we are kind of helped out by the fact that the utilities are already building infrastructure in preparation for that demand, in part because utilities in New England, at least the big investor-owned ones like Rhode Island Energy, National Grid, Eversource, they don't really make their money selling electricity. They really make their money building the infrastructure to get the electricity to your house, which in this case helps us because they're looking at increased electric loads in the future, and they are very excited to build all the infrastructure necessary to make sure that homes can be heated with electricity because it is within their best interests. Next slide. Now, there is also I mentioned utility incentives before, so we can also talk about what's happening on the gas side. There is a narrative going around that it is energy efficiency, so, partly Mass Save in Massachusetts, and a lack of pipelines that is making gas more expensive. And the reality of it is that's actually not what's happening. Um, there's a few different things that have kind of contributed to the fact that natural gas heating is much more expensive than it used to be even fairly recently. One of those is about a decade ago, there was a large explosion in California, and that incentivized a national movement for more fixing of gas infrastructure. So in Massachusetts, we have the GSEP program. Rhode Island has its own version of that. And that basically allowed the gas utilities to spend much more money doing maintenance on their old pipelines than they used to. And that includes stuff like taking out the old steel cast iron pipes, which from a safety perspective is great. From a cost perspective, it is really bad because it is incredibly expensive to remove all of those pipes and replace them with newer pipes. The total costs in Massachusetts are going to be in the tens of billions of dollars if the GSEP, the Gas System Enhancement Program, actually goes on for as long as it's projected to take. And another factor that we're seeing on the gas side kind of happening at the same time is partly because we've had a series of warmer winters before this last one, and partly because more homes are being built all electric, and partly because of the energy efficiency programs that states around here have invested a lot of money in, is that we're actually seeing gas demand either flat or falling. And you'd think that would make gas cheaper, but the way most of the cost of the gas system is maintaining those old gas pipes, especially more now that we're spending more than we used to on maintaining those old gas pipes. And that cost needs to be borne by customers, regardless of how much gas is actually going through the system. So if you're selling 1 million units of gas and it costs you $1 million to do that, you can sell it for like, $1 per unit of gas. But suddenly, if you're selling 500,000 units of gas, you may save money by having to buy less gas if you're the utility, but all of your maintenance costs are still the same size. So maybe it then costs you, $1.25 per unit of gas in order to heat everyone's homes. And that's what we're seeing, especially in parts of Massachusetts, where these gas utilities are spending more money than they ever have before, but they're also getting less customers paying into the system. And then they also have other costs like utilities will subsidize new gas hookups, something that is currently before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities and something we are arguing against. Because obviously, from an energy affordability point of view, it is quite bad that all of these gas utilities are spending a lot of money. At the same time, they're having less customers than ever, because that does mean that they're kind of locked into having to charge higher prices, which means that they're going to have to spend more money. And that's what we're seeing, especially in parts of Massachusetts, where these gas utilities are spending a lot of money. At the same time, they're having less customers than ever, because that does mean that they're kind of locked into having to charge higher prices, just to continue being financially operational. And we could enter a scenario where if it becomes cheaper for everyone to, double down on energy efficiency or switch to electric heat pumps or, do whatever it takes to use less gas because gas has just become so expensive, that kind of starts feeding into a doom loop where there's ever less customers, but there's still maintenance costs that need to be paid. So the gas utilities have to increase rates. And I mean, that is something that is a real problem that we could be facing. And that is something where if we just make another gas pipeline going down to Pennsylvania, it would not solve the fundamental problems that we face. In fact, Massachusetts, I mean, I know New England has more capacity to import gas than we actually have been over the last couple of winters, because we do have a big liquefied natural gas terminal where we can import gas from anywhere on the globe in actually only a couple miles from where I live in Everett. And we've barely been using that big piece of infrastructure, despite the fact that Massachusetts gas customers have been paying for it in their bills, because there just hasn't been enough demand to really need to use it. So building another pipeline would not actually bring down the cost of gas, despite what I think some fossil fuel interests are kind of trying to convince people of.
So, Carrie, bottom line here is that some people are thinking that gas is cheap and bills are high because of clean energy, is what the narrative that we've been hearing. And I guess you're trying to say that the prognosis or the future for gas is iffy, right? It looks like gas could go up in price over time, right?
Yeah, this is definitely all more, what I'm saying is more true for the distributing gas to like individuals' homes through their gas utilities. This doesn't necessarily impact natural gas power plants. Those are kind of two different, for lack of a better term, like economic systems where one can be doing really bad and the other one can be fine. They're not entirely connected. But at least on the building side, the sheer cost of maintaining all of the gas pipes to everyone's homes really requires a lot of people to be buying gas. And if that stops being true, gas just has to become more expensive.
Now, we've read and heard a lot of consumers think that the new pipelines would help reduce the cost. Can you just, the gas utilities, are they willing to build those pipelines with money from shareholders, or are they looking to ratepayers for that?
Yeah, that's kind of the one big issue with the idea of let's build another pipeline is, well, someone is going to have to pay for it. And if it's going in to meet the needs of gas utility customers, then it would be gas utility customers. So you could see your bill increase for this piece of infrastructure, which, to be blunt, really isn't needed. New England has historically been pretty gas constrained. Like we haven't been able to get as much gas, um, in New England as we would like from like the big shale producing areas in Pennsylvania because there hasn't been that many pipelines. But we've also been fairly good at adapting to that. A lot of power plants switch from gas to oil, which means that we can kind of live with the gas capacity that we have. And as I said before, we have the ability to bring in massive amounts of natural gas from out of the country by sea through the Everett Marine Terminal. And we really haven't been doing that. So the idea that we need a new pipeline is a bit like saying we need a second car, even if we're just one person. It's not quite clear what it would even be used for.
All right. Now, Tina is our Rhode Island policy advocate. We've got Carrie in Massachusetts and Tina in Rhode Island. They do a great job talking to legislators and the executive branch, but you're hearing similar things in Rhode Island, I think. Tina, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And I want to preface by saying my next two slides utilize examples that I've seen in Rhode Island, but many of the themes, similar to what Carrie had just touched on, are applicable to both states. So in this first slide, the image you see came from Rhode Island's Energy Efficiency Council and details some of the many benefits of energy efficiency and the benefits that we as ratepayers, if you have Rhode Island Energy as your utility, are paying for. One of the main points is that energy efficiency can lower utility costs by reducing the total amount of electricity that we need to purchase, because if you weatherize your home or you increase, the insulation in your home or the insulation in your attic, the units of fuel that you're using or the units of electricity that you're using to heat your home or cool your home can be used more efficiently, and you don't need to use as much or buy as much to heat your home or to cool your home. I also want to note this big takeaway in the middle, that for about every $1 invested into energy efficiency, that results in $3 of benefits to Rhode Islanders. And related to that point, energy efficiency has benefits outside of just that monetary value or reduced greenhouse gas emissions, but energy efficiency also has big public health benefits. For example, if someone were to install a heat pump in their home, they would be using a highly efficient electric appliance, but because they're using an electric appliance and can get rid of their fossil fuel burning appliance, they're no longer combusting a fuel in their home, and their indoor air quality can be improved, which improves the health of the occupants of that dwelling. I also want to note that for a greater public health benefit, installing a heat pump, say my colleague Carrie installs a heat pump, even though she in her own home is no longer combusting fossil fuels, the outdoor air quality improves as well, and her neighbors can also experience improved air quality and those benefits of energy efficiency. So while one person may be installing an energy efficiency or an electrification measure, those benefits are not just felt by that one person, they're felt by many other people. And when that's expanded across states or across societies, that leads to many more sizable benefits. My next slide, I want to outline clean energy costs and what we've been seeing with clean energy costs on utility bills. So this slide has used data from Rhode Island Energy's proposed rate change from a docket that was in front of Rhode Island's Public Utilities Commission earlier this spring. And the rows highlighted in green are clean energy investments, and the rows highlighted in orange are the largest bill contributors on the average residential ratepayer bill. And this would be for a residential customer utilizing 500 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. So this past winter, we've seen a lot of concern about the high utility bills that ratepayers are facing. And there at times has been an emphasis or even a blame placed on clean energy spending or clean energy public policy measures as what's created that cost burden. But the truth is that by investing in energy efficiency and by investing in clean energy, we can drive down reliance on fossil fuels, particularly volatile fossil fuel prices. And if you look at the rows highlighted both in green and orange, you can see that those clean energy programs in green are quite a small overall percentage and overall dollar amount on a monthly utility bill, whereas those orange charges are both the largest dollar amount and the largest percentage contributor to utility bills. So when there's this emphasis placed on clean energy spending as the reason for why customer bills are so high, that is not, the entire story. We really need to look at the entire bill as, one piece that ratepayers are paying for, and not pick out individual policies and how those are impacting people, especially as utility costs and electric costs vary per season from winter to summer for Rhode Island Energy last resort customers, and can vary more frequently for ratepayers that utilize a community aggregation program or a third-party supplier.
Tina, could I stop you for 1 second? This is sort of a moment, a teachable moment here, which is the reason we were showing this. We calculated that the clean energy spending increased 2.6%. But we observed that a TV reporter in Rhode Island went on live on TV and was asking, I think, a legislator why clean energy spending was going up 43%. And so if you look at the top row in green, one of the programs went up 43%, but it's a small program, and the reporter ignored the other clean energy programs. So we did the math, and it wasn't, the total of them only increased by 2.6%. So that's an example. I don't think the reporter was trying to spread disinformation, but the caution we have for everybody tonight is even the media can make mistakes, believe it or not. And we if we see a mistake, we need to try to call them out on it. And so we wrote a blog about that. And we caution you. We don't want to say that it's, fake news. It was not good reporting though. And if you're in Rhode Island and you hear at a barbecue that clean energy spending went up 43%, someone maybe saw that on TV and just thinks that it's gospel, and we know that it's not. So,
Larry, if I could add on to your point, I just want to highlight as well that while it's true that renewable energy growth charge increased by 43%, when you look at the dollar value of that charge, it only increased from $4.02 to about $5.75. And that renewable energy growth charge is a fixed charge on Rhode Island Energy Last Resort Service electric bills, meaning that charge will not fluctuate with your monthly usage. So if you use more than 500 kilowatt hours or less, that dollar value will not go up or go down. And, while we don't want to, not show that utility costs and affordability is the problem, because we definitely see that affordability can be difficult in certain times. We want to highlight that clean energy spending is a prudent and good investment that helps Rhode Islanders and helps us meet our climate goals and can drive economic growth.
Correct. Yes, we'll come back to that. Thank you, Tina. You want to go to the next slide? Just want to point out that one of the groups that we work closely with is the Alliance for Climate Transition, and they have a web page dedicated to resources about misinformation. So if you want another look at what another organization's saying about this, they're doing the same thing we're trying to do tonight. So that's a resource that you might want to take a peek at. Next slide. We have a lot of really cool events as an organization in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've got May 6th, Anna's doing electric vehicle charging at home. May 10th, 19th, and June 4th, we've got events in Rhode Island. Solar Tour, Wind Turbine Tour, our spring meeting on May 19th in Providence at a beautiful location. Anna again on June 11th, electric vehicle charging on the go. June 26th, more Anna. Is a used EV right for you? Not just Anna, but also Caroline. And you can get, we keep adding events. So go to our webpage and you can learn about those. Next slide. Oh, we are a nonprofit organization and we do a great job. You just heard 4 outstanding speakers talk about misinformation, disinformation. They're experts on all these things, but I have to pay them. And so if you could donate, it's tax deductible, and I would appreciate it. And I think they would too. But more importantly, this helps achieve our mission, where we are trying to speed a just transition. And we do it through a combination of programs and advocacy. It's my job to ask. Next slide. Now, Anna, there's something big happening. Could you explain what's happening and how people can help?
Yes, this right here is an example of misinformation and disinformation in action. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island have both adopted a series of regulations out of California. So California writes regulations other states have the ability to adopt those regulations that have to do with vehicle efficiency and emissions. And there is a nationwide effort, mostly funded by automakers and the fossil fuel lobby, to undo those regulations. So you may have heard news on the federal level that there are several simultaneous attempts, both in Congress and in the courts, to basically undo the part of the Clean Air Act that allows states like California, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island to have these regulations in the first place. And so you might have heard about tomorrow, the House of Representatives federally will be voting on a Congressional Review Act of these waivers. The Supreme Court is hearing a case that has to do with this, but we're not talking about federal stuff today, we're talking about state stuff. So just as there's a campaign focused at the federal government, governors across the country are under a lot of pressure from those same actors to delay these regulations. So the key ones that we're talking about today are called Advanced Clean Cars 2. They require automakers to slowly ramp up the percentage of new vehicles that they sell in Massachusetts and Rhode Island as electric over time. So it's a gradual transition. There's lots of flexibilities built in to make it possible for automakers to comply, but governors, again, are under a lot of pressure to delay. So we are having a somewhat emergency webinar tomorrow. We'll be joined by the Natural Resources Defense Council, an organization called Green Latinos, and the Union of Concerned Scientists, and we'll talk about what the heck is ACC2, why is it so critical for climate and public health, what is happening, how is it under attack at the federal and state level, and how do we take action? And so right now, the big call to action is in Massachusetts to call Governor Healy and ask her to stand strong in the face of all the pressure that states are under to delay. In Rhode Island right now, there's a little bit less pressure because Rhode Island isn't starting implementation this year anyway. Rhode Island's sort of 1 year behind, so there isn't a lot of pressure there yet. But in Massachusetts, there certainly is. So please join us on Thursday. We'll talk about all this, and then we'll actually just take 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for everybody to email and or call Governor Healy's office. So hope you can join us on Thursday.
Anna, we can send information about how they can contact the governor with the follow-up to this as well.
Yes, and I will also put it in the chat.
Very good. Thank you. All right, next slide, please, Tina. Questions, here we are. All right, so got some questions. We'll spread them around. Amanda, somebody asked about maintenance cost on wind and solar. Comparing that to the maintenance of gas pipelines and fossil fuel facilities. Are wind and solar expensive to maintain?
So I would say, first of all, that operation and maintenance costs for wind and solar are factored into the fixed price that developers contract with the state. So offshore wind and solar are developed at a fixed price through what's called a power purchase agreement, which sets the rate that we're going to be paying for their energy over 20 to 30 years, or however long the contract is for. So it's already kind of shown when they bid that price. I'll also add that wind and solar systems are able to generate electricity without burning fuel. So, there's no need for procuring the fuel and the delivery infrastructure for the fuel. We don't have to figure out where we're going to store the fuel on site. We don't need the systems for combusting the fuel. So I think overall, offshore wind and solar don't have the same level of, operations and maintenance costs that fossil fuels do.
Very good. Anna, here's one for you. When we talk about the life cycle of a car, does that include of an electric car? Does that include the disposal of the electric battery?
The particular resource that we pointed to from the Union of Concerned Scientists, who are the science people who did that analysis, does not include disposal. However, there's really exciting developments on that front. So a lot of people are really concerned about the end of life of electric vehicle batteries. But the good news is that when a battery is no longer fit to be used in an electric vehicle, if the overall sort of capacity has decreased a certain amount in year 15 or whatever of the vehicle's life, it still has enough charge to be used as stationary storage. So there are examples already and have been for years of different types of entities using used electric vehicle batteries for either backup power or to basically serve as grid storage to balance out supply and demand, either for the grid or for particular sites that draw a lot of power and want to reduce their demand overall. So point one is you can reuse the batteries. Point two is you can recycle the batteries. So all of the batteries that we're talking about today or in the market right now are lithium-ion batteries, and they all have lots of metals and minerals in them that have a lot of value. So it's unlikely that at the end of a life of a vehicle or at the end of the battery's life, that those are just going to get chucked in a landfill somewhere because people can make money from recycling them. So there are several companies that have come into force in the last couple of years that are working with automakers to make that a more closed loop so that automakers can take recycled minerals from used batteries and build them into new batteries. One company in particular is called Redwood Materials, but there's lots more. The Inflation Reduction Act put a lot of support into this space, which is one of the many reasons why we are really concerned about any potential rollbacks at the federal level. But the industry as a whole is looking into recycling in a big way, which is exciting, but definitely something we'll need to keep an eye on for sure.
Very good. Question. A few of you are going to answer this one. I'll start with Amanda. Is there a discussion about promoting geothermal heat pumps? We've been talking mostly about air source heat pumps, but how about geothermal?
I think that geothermal is definitely going to be a key piece of the puzzle. It is a very efficient heating source, even more efficient than air source heat pumps, which are already very efficient. I think there are some pilots happening in Massachusetts, which maybe Carrie can say more about.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of worth breaking geothermal into just two different categories. There is like the single household, single pump geothermal systems, which have been around for a while. Those are great. They are more expensive to build up front, but you do get savings on them because they are more efficient. They use less electricity. And importantly, when we're talking about stress to the electric grid, they are the most efficient compared to air source heat pumps when it is coldest out, which means they deliver savings right at the point where the value of electricity is highest, which makes them very useful from an energy standpoint. There's some incentives for those, I think through Mass Save, and I think probably through the Rhode Island equivalent as well. I think one challenging thing is the utilities are less enthusiastic about these single air source heat pump, ground source heat pumps because they don't own them, and they also use less electricity, which means the utilities don't get to build as much infrastructure as they would like to because that's how they make money. So I think that's kind of one area holding it, like the high cost and the fact that it's not in the utilities' interest to promote them are two things holding them back. But it is a developed and really cool technology with some major companies involved in installing heat pumps across the area. As far as like there's also the newer network geothermal systems, which there are two sorry, I keep saying that. There's one pilot happening right now in Massachusetts that's currently built. And what it is, it's basically a lot of geothermal heat pumps all connected together that kind of share heat from one another. So if you have like an ice rink that needs to pump out a lot of coldness, you can do that into the system, and then it can be taken up by maybe a house that's trying to air condition itself. It's a very, that can be even more efficient than single ground source heat pumps because buildings are kind of sharing the energy load. And the utilities are more interested in this concept because they are interested in the idea that they would build this and that it could, in theory, kind of be a system that replaces the gas system for them. And by that, I mean like a massive piece of infrastructure that people use to heat their homes that's both cost effective for the customer, so people want to connect to it, and is really big and expensive to build, which means the utilities would be allowed to charge a lot of money um, in order to like be paid back for the money that because they're always incentivized to spend more money, and this is something they would get to spend more money on. So they are really interested in this idea as sometimes sort of maybe a way that they could get away from gas when they are in a mood to acknowledge that's actually something they're going to have to do, which is not something they're consistent about.
And I'll
T-
just add
yeah.
on for some additional information in Rhode Island. We have colleagues at the advocacy organization Climate Jobs Rhode Island that are supporting a bill in the Rhode Island House. It's Bill 5576, the Thermal Energy Networks and Jobs Act, which would direct our public utility, Rhode Island Energy, to maximize investments in thermal energy networks or district geothermal when it's in the public interest. And Rhode Island also has a future of gas study or future of gas docket that's open at our Public Utilities Commission, exploring the future of the gas regulated distribution system in light of our Act on Climate. And when that final report comes out, perhaps in May, we're hoping that that will also explore geothermal and what Rhode Island can do to explore that as an option to help meet our climate goals.
Thank you. We're getting close to wrapping up. Lisa puts in the Q&A that reminder that we still have the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, which offers a lot of tax credits for clean energy. But for geothermal, it's a very generous tax credit. It's 30% on the entire cost of a ground source heat pump or geothermal. It's 30% for an air source heat pump, but only up to $2,000, and which is still pretty good. But for the ground source heat pump, if you do that, it makes it it can be very competitive with fossil fuels. So now I get a question I'm going to ask everyone to answer. Question is, you know, should we be more proactive in setting the narrative about the benefits of clean energy, or are we reacting to this anti-wind, anti-EV, anti-heat pump stuff? Or are we should we not be talking about disinformation and misinformation, or should we just be talking about benefits? I'll go in order. Anna.
I was not expecting to be first in order. I think this is a really tricky balance, and I think it's something I personally think about a lot. I've learned from our excellent marketing team that if you repeat a myth, even if you repeat it just for the purpose of showing that it is a myth, it solidifies in people's minds. So I try to both keep that in mind and really stress the benefits and just talk about what we know is true, but also acknowledge that some level of education about like what is misinformation versus what is disinformation, who are the forces behind the myths that we do here, is also motivating. So those are sort of two slightly opposing instincts, but I try to balance those two. So when we're out at electric vehicle events or talking to legislators, we'll talk about the positives. So what you'll see at the webinar on Thursday about Advanced Clean Cars 2, it's a webinar about why we need it, and how excellent it is, and how it will help our economy and public health and our climate missions, all that. That's really the focus and the thrust of that webinar, even though maybe the timing of it is a response to a lot of the misconceptions and disinformation that are floating around, particularly right now. So I hope that answered the question.
It does. Carrie, should we be saying that clean energy is good, or should we be saying it's not bad?
So this actually goes back to the first campaign I was ever involved with in politics, which was a ballot initiative on transgender rights. And the thing we had to talk to people about at the doors, because I was obviously arguing for transgender rights, was bathrooms, because that's what people cared about. That's what everyone was concerned about. And we knew that's what the opposition was going to scare people about closer to the election. So we talked about this issue. We talked about the facts around it. We educated folks. We even showed people like a kind of video that the opposition had used in an earlier campaign in Houston, and then had a conversation with voters about why the video and the fear mongering didn't actually make any logical sense. And that was really effective. And, that ballot initiative, we defeated the ballot initiative. Confusingly, we were the Yes campaign, but we won in 2018, so it doesn't matter that that was confusing. Um, and I think that really goes to you have to talk to people where you're at, even if you'd rather be talking about other things. It's important to acknowledge what your opposition is going to throw at you, because if you can respond effectively, you can beat it, even if they come up with very emotional, very impactful nonsense. As long as you take the time to point out that it is nonsense, you can win, which is something I very much believe in.
Very good. Amanda, are there benefits to wind turbines other than the fact that they don't kill whales?
There certainly are, yes. And I think both Anna and Carrie answered this question well in that, we definitely need to be telling the positive story of, in my case, offshore wind, and, really keeping all of the benefits at the top of the news cycle. But with that being said, I think that the misinformation has been repeated so much, like that offshore wind supposedly kills whales, that if we don't respond to that, they're going to think that we don't have an answer. So I do agree that, we should largely keep it positive, but I think we also need to respond to some of the common myths that we're seeing, such as the whales one, and we need to clearly state that that is not true and call that out.
Yeah. Now, Tina, you are our interviewer on our podcast. Do you want to talk about the podcast before you break?
Yes, I would love to. So, Green Energy Consumers Alliance has a new podcast. It's called Consumers for Climate. And we recently launched at the end of this winter, but we've started with just giving overviews of that podcast with several of our fellow staff members here at Green Energy Consumers Alliance, focusing on some of our main topics. And in that, we both addressed commonly asked questions or things that we've heard that we'd like to go into more depth about. So, for example, with Anna, we did a Transportation 101 focusing on electric vehicles, and we went into questions about charging, where to charge, how to fund an electric vehicle, what's available for people that are interested in potentially purchasing or leasing an electric vehicle. And those are great short resources if folks are interested in any of our topics. My colleague Amanda did one on offshore wind. Carrie did one on Massachusetts policy. One of our other colleagues, Loie, did a great one on heat pumps and energy efficient fisheries. And you can look to that on our website as just another resource that will help you navigate clean energy technology or understand a little bit more questions that come up at family barbecues and help you understand what the truth is on some of these big topics.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank our guest for coming tonight. And we appreciate the comments. Rob loves the podcast. Which one was the best, Rob? Was it the one I did? I wonder. Maybe not. But I want to thank Anna, Carrie, Amanda, and Tina. They do a great job every day, but in particular for the last hour. So watch everybody for your email. We will send you the slides, the recording, and some other information as well. Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, all.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. So today we will be speaking about More EV, and we'll explain the program, and we'll talk about some stackable incentives, both with More EV and the federal tax credit. We'll start with an EV 101, we'll go into charging, and then we'll finish with some real examples of used EVs, and we'll see how those incentives stack up. And what's really great is a lot of them are available near us. Okay. So we're from Green Energy Consumers Alliance. So we're a nonprofit based in Massachusetts and Rhode Island with an organizational mission of empowering consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. We've been around since 1982. We do a lot of programming around clean energy, efficiency, very community focused. Our Drive Green program started in 2016 and has really evolved since then. We started with the mission to educate consumers about the benefits of EVs, and we even provided a platform through which they could buy EVs. We worked with local dealers and did a lot of outreach. But since then, since the pandemic, and since as market trends have shifted, we're now completely focused on outreach and events. And so we're lucky to work with community partners and facilitate ride and drives. We know that experiencing an EV and being in the car on your own can really help to internalize all that we're talking about today. So we're excited to, share this presentation with you. So the Department of Energy Resources, or the DOER, is partnered with the Center for Sustainable Energy, or CSE, and they administer the More EV program. The DOER does a lot of statewide and energy programs they facilitate, and CSE is a national nonprofit organization, and their mission is to accelerate the adoption of clean transportation. That's where More EV comes into play. So we'll first start with defining More EV. It's a rebate program through More EV. There are various rebates for battery electric vehicles and fuel cell EVs. There are a few subsets of rebates under the program. There is a standard rebate, and that's $3,500. And then there is a used rebate that is also $3,500. There's an income qualifying additional $1,500. And there is More EV trade-in, that's an additional $1,000. There's also a $7,500 rebate for electric pickup trucks and other Class 2B vehicles, which we will go over today, but we'll spend less time on those rebates. And luckily, point of sale is available for standard, More EV Use, and More EV Plus. These can all be combined. We'll get into the specifics in just a little bit. So today, like I mentioned, we're going to start with an EV 101. We'll get into charging. We'll talk about some of the benefits of EVs on a public health perspective and from an economical perspective. Then we'll do a deep dive into More EV. We'll talk about the pre-qualification process and how to access the rebates. We'll also talk about the federal tax credit because these incentives can be stacked. And we'll finish with a Q&A. So if you have any questions, if you want to drop them in the chat, we'll spend some time at the end of the presentation to address your comments and questions. Start with some EV 101. So we'll start with a battery electric vehicle. These are for drivers who want to achieve zero tailpipe emissions and have access to charging. They're battery powered fully. Most BEVs have a range of 60 to 350 miles. More of what we're seeing is 220 plus to the early 300 range with most modern EVs that are on the road right now. There can be fully charged at anywhere from 4 to 10 hours, and this depends on the type and level of charging you are using, as well as your vehicle and the vehicle's onboard capacity. There are lots of EVs out there. I'm sure you may have seen the Equinox EV. There's the Hyundai Ioniq, the Ford Mach-E, all Teslas. So there's a bunch of EVs out there, and we'll look at some real examples. And one other thing is that BEVs can be charged at home or at a public charging station. They require limited maintenance, so you will never need an oil change again. And there's lower fuel costs as well, and maintenance costs. We'll get into that in a little bit. There are also plug-in hybrids. I will start by saying that plug-in hybrids do not qualify for the More EV program, although they do qualify for the federal tax credit. So plug-in hybrids have both a gas engine and a small battery. They're powered by both, and their total range generally is around from 150 to 570 miles, and anywhere from 25 to 53 miles would be purely electric coming from that battery. And that depends on the vehicle and model that you are driving. And these vehicles can be hooked up to a level 1 or a level 2 charger. And depending on that level of charging, your plug-in hybrid can be fully charged in anywhere as little from 1.5 to 10 hours. So it totally depends on the vehicle and the type of charging that you're using. Some examples are the Toyota Prius Prime, Chrysler Pacifica. There's a Toyota RAV4 Prime, that's a plug-in hybrid, the Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid as well. There are also fuel cell EVs, and these are for drivers who like to combine zero-emission driving of a battery electric car with the quick and easy refueling of hydrogen. So they're powered by hydrogen, and refueling generally takes around 3 to 5 minutes, and you would need to fuel at a hydrogen refueling station. There are a couple in New England. Most of the fuel cell EVs on the road are in California. There are more refueling stations there, and the total range is very similar to that of EVs, ranging from 250 to 320 miles in range. And some examples are the Toyota Mirai, there's a Honda Clarity, and there's a Hyundai Nexo as well. And what's great about fuel cell EVs is that actually most manufacturers will provide free refueling for the first 3 years. To provide a brief overview of some of the benefits of EVs, we can know that they reduce or eliminate tailpipe emissions. Battery electric vehicles produce zero tailpipe emissions, but a plug-in hybrid will, because it also is a gas engine. Electric cars greatly reduce air pollution. In Massachusetts alone, more than 95% of air pollution comes from the combustion of fossil fuels, and that includes vehicles on the road. Fewer vehicle emissions will also mean less pollutants for the environment. This improves public health and better air quality within our neighborhoods and communities. We'll talk about fuel costs very quickly. So every few months, we look at fuel costs and we do the math to determine how much you are saving per mile on electricity versus per mile on gas. So we're looking at the price per kilowatt hour at National Grid and Eversource, two utilities in Massachusetts. And we made a couple of assumptions. First, that the efficiency of an EV is 0.3 kilowatts per mile. And then in 2024 and 2025, the average efficiency of a gas car is 28 miles per gallon. And we actually updated this recently because the price of gas recently changed. So at the beginning of May, the average price of gas in New England was $2.96 per gallon. And then I'll go through pretty quickly our process behind that math. So we made those assumptions. We can see that for National Grid, the cost per kilowatt hour right now is around 18 cents. And then versus in Eversource territory, that's 31 cents. So then to calculate that cost per mile of electricity, we can multiply the total cost per kilowatt hour by the assumed efficiency of EVs per mile. So for National Grid, we multiplied 18 cents by 0.3. And we can find that the cost to drive per mile on electricity is around 5 cents. And then we'll repeat that process for Eversource, and the cost to drive per mile on electricity is around 9 cents. Then we calculated the cost to drive per mile on gas. And what that looked like was we divided the average gas price by the assumed fuel efficiency of gas cars. And we found that gas car drivers generally pay around 11 cents per mile on gas. And then we just subtract those two numbers to find how much money you save per mile on electricity versus per gas. So for National Grid customers, as you can see, you'll generally save around 6 cents per mile on electricity than for gas. And for Eversource customers, it's around 2 cents. These numbers do change quarterly. So in June and July, we'll be updating our fuel costs. And when we send our slides, if you're interested in looking at our math and reading more about fuel costs and our methodology, you're welcome to do so. And that's also linked on our Drive Green page on our website. So vehicles in battery electric vehicles generally have a higher range and are more efficient. When I say efficiency, that really refers to how much energy is being used to complete a task. So the higher efficiency, the less waste we'll produce and the more energy we'll get out of it. Total range will take into account efficiency and battery size. You might see that on the left, on the first image, we're looking at many battery electric vehicles, and then we'll have some more plug-in hybrids on the right. You can see that blue refers to electric range, whereas orange refers to gas range. And some of our models are within that 250, 220 to 300 plus range in terms of electric range. And then we can also look at, on the right, the miles per gallon versus the miles per gallon equivalent of all electric cars and gas cars. And miles per gallon equivalent refers to the unit of measurement, and this compares the energy consumption of EVs with that of traditional gas-powered vehicles. So what we have on the left are battery electric vehicles, followed by plug-in hybrids, followed by gas cars. And you might be able to see that the miles per gallon equivalent is more efficient than that of their gas car counterparts far on the right. And then I wanted to briefly talk about maintenance costs before we talk about charging and define the different levels of charging, especially if you're new to EVs. We did mention in the beginning that battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids as well generally have lower maintenance costs than gas cars. And you might be able to see here on this graph that we got from the US Department of Energy that there are a whole orange category right at the top, right where not sure if you can see my mouse, but that this category of cost does not exist for EVs. So this can include transmission service, and this generally is because EVs don't have tailpipes and don't cause tailpipe emissions. So that is what that category of costs is referring to. And if we also are looking at this graph again, if there is an orange-ish, yellowish category that says brake pads, we might know that EVs rarely have to replace their brake pads. And that is very different in contrast to gas cars, largely because EVs have an awesome technology called regenerative braking. So if you are driving your EV and you're rolling to a stop sign, when you lift your foot off the brake, that energy translates to heat and helps to enhance your battery's range. And in general, there's less wear and tear in terms of maintenance costs and with an EV. And Anna is welcome to jump in at any time if you have any other comments. I know there's a lot to go through on terms of maintenance costs, and we can always have a conversation about that in the Q&A if you have any more questions. But we'll move into charging, and we'll briefly just define the different levels of charging and how they work and what most people use. We'll start with level 1. It's the slowest method of charging. It'll utilize a traditional or more conventional 120 volt outlet that you have in your home. This generally only takes place at home because it is a little bit slower and also very easy to set up due to the widespread availability of these types of outlets. That range generally ranges from 3.5 miles to 6.5 miles of charge per hour. So it's pretty slow, but it is also sufficient for drivers who might charge overnight and drive anywhere from 30 to 40 miles per day. So this might be you if you have a plug-in hybrid or a battery EV. If you're driving a plug-in hybrid and that typical range of 30 to 40 miles per day falls within your driving patterns, then that might mean that that type of vehicle or a pure battery electric vehicle is suitable for your lifestyle. Charging cables will come with the vehicle generally, and one will plug right into that outlet. There's no installation required for this because we tend to have these outlets at home. So I'll also say that level 1 charging will generally use a connector or port plug that's called the J1772 plug, or it'll use a Tesla connector that can plug into the EV, or it'll plug through an adapter. We'll move on to level 2. Level 2 is much faster than level 1, and it will require installing a charging station. And what that is called is electric vehicle supply equipment refers to infrastructure changes, including the charging stations. That is often referred to as an acronym called EVSE, referring to electrical vehicle supply equipment. So that installation will utilize a 240 volt or a 208 volt electrical circuit. This type of outlet generally powers your washing machine and other heavier duty appliances. And level 2 can be found at public charging stations, very popular at home. Range per hour of charge varies from 14 to 35 miles, depending on the vehicle and also the charger's onboard capacity. So I did mention before that if you charge overnight or drive somewhere between 30 to 50 miles of charge per day, then level 1, or particularly level 2, can be very suitable for most people's driving patterns. And then level 2 will also use a standard J1772 plug or a Tesla connector that can plug right into an EV. And so I think we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but when I say Tesla connector, I just refer to the fact that many major manufacturers are adopting a port that's referred to as the North American Charging Standard. It is the same port that Tesla vehicles use. So many vehicles and many manufacturers are making available adapters for EV drivers to plug in to their vehicle if they're charging at a public charging station, and more vehicles as well that are coming on the road are having that NACS port as a native feature that's already in the vehicle that does not require an adapter. All right. And then we'll also talk about DC fast charging. This is very fast, very energy intensive, and are only found at public charging stations. And so this will generally use a higher voltage because it takes a lot of energy. Your vehicle will be able to reach anywhere from 0 or 10 to 80% of a full charge in as little as 30 minutes. That can translate to about 100 miles. So it's very fast. You can see that this image here, this charging station is 480 volts. So that's quite a big difference from what we were talking about with level 1 and level 2. Well, in the next slide, we'll talk about where you can find charging near you. And there are a lot of level 2 and DC fast charging stations in the area. And these DC fast chargers sometimes will involve a NACS, will be a NACS port if the Tesla supercharging station, or a J1772, or a CHAdeMO plug, which we may or may not talk about in the presentation, but we can surely address that in the Q&A. And then I'll get into charging in terms of where to find charging. This is a screenshot from PlugShare. PlugShare is a mapping tool that allows users to identify charging stations near them. So it functions similarly to Google Maps in the sense that you can plug in your location anywhere in the world. These are two areas. This is Eastern Mass and Western Mass. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible just to showcase the fact that there are a lot of charging stations. There are more closer to Boston as well, in other parts of the state. Just for the sake of these two screenshots, we had to zoom out quite a bit to show case wider areas. You might notice though, there's different colors going on in this slide. So you might see that the green icons refer to level 2 chargers and charging stations, and orange refers to DC fast charging stations. And then there are also different icons with tools, and that really refers to charging stations that are currently being built. And this map gets updated all of the time. So I encourage you to plug in your location or close to where you drive, maybe for work, and to see what type of charging stations are near you. One last thing I'll mention about PlugShare is that it is open source. So what that means is if you go to a charging station and it's full and people are using it, you might be able to see that in real time. Or likewise, if a charging station that has been in construction, if it's fully operational now, you'll see that. And if there's a maintenance issue, you'll also see reports of that on the app. So highly recommend taking a look there. Now we'll finally get into the gist of MoreEV and the program. We already really talked about the different subsets of rebates under MoreEV, and we'll get into how you can stack the different rebates that we talked about. So we'll spend a little bit more time on this slide because this is a really good graphic that dictates what the rebates are and which can be received at the point of sale. So MoreEV Standard covers new and light duty vehicles, and that's $3,500, and that's the same amount of value for MoreEV Used. And those are for light duty vehicles. Both of those rebates can be received at the point of sale or post-purchase. And there is a time period post-purchase through which you can apply online. And there is an income qualifying rebate adder, and that is an additional $1,500 that you can stack on to that $3,500. And then lastly, there are rebates for trucks. So for pickup trucks, this is a $7,500 rebate, and it must be a purely battery electric vehicle or fuel cell EV, and must weigh between 6,000 and 10,000 pounds. That's pretty heavy. And then what we won't talk about today there's also MoreEV trucks, and that's a rebate for much heavier vehicles. And if you are part of a business or a nonprofit organization or any institution, you might take advantage of that program in case you are looking to electrify your fleet. And then in terms of eligibility requirements for MoreEV Standard, that is the $3,500 rebate for new light duty EVs. You must be a resident of Massachusetts, or you must be a business or nonprofit organization that's licensed here and located here. In terms of vehicle eligibility, it must be a new battery electric vehicle or fuel cell EV, and the total price limit must be $55,000 or less. And there is also an eligible vehicle list, which I think we'll have an image of. It's a really cool tool if you're on the MoreEV website and navigate to participating vehicles. You can search a type of vehicle name, and then the site will tell you very plainly if that vehicle qualifies. And if it does qualify, where to find it if you'd like. And then in terms of program eligibility, if you are leasing, you must be leasing for at least a period of 36 months. Now, MoreEV Used is that $3,500 rebate for used light-duty EVs. Again, you must be a Massachusetts resident. You must also be participating in an approved income qualifying program, or you have to prove that your modified adjusted gross income does not exceed either $150,000 if you are filing taxes jointly, $112,000 if you are a head of a household, or that limit is $75,000 if you file taxes individually. And then for vehicle eligibility, the vehicle must be a used battery electric or fuel cell EV. The model year must at least be 2 years prior to the calendar year you are purchasing or leasing in. And then that MSRP or purchase price limit is $40,000 or less in the scenario. And you may not have received the vehicle might not have received the rebate in the last 36 months. And then that leasing term again is 36 months in this for this More EV used rebate. And then to prove your eligibility, you must be a Massachusetts resident, and you must participate in an income qualified program or you must be able to prove that your adjusted gross income does fall under those limits. These are a few of the programs that you might be involved in that will indicate that you are eligible for More EV used. So Mass Save is an example, LIHEAP is another example as well as SNAP. And there is a pre-qualification process to receive that rebate at the point of sale. And these are some more qualifying programs for More EV used and More EV Plus. Again, we still see Mass Health. There's also the Low Income Weatherization Assistance Program. So there's a full list here, and we can send that list as a part of the slides when we send that out to you at the end of this webinar. In terms of More EV trucks, again, you must be a Massachusetts resident, or you're a private business that is licensed to do business here, or you're a nonprofit or an educational institution, or a part of the local municipal or state governments that are located and operating in Massachusetts. And in terms of vehicle eligibility, the vehicle or truck must have a gross vehicle weight rating that's in between 6,000 to 10,000 pounds. And can be of any body type. So this can be considered a heavy duty truck. It might be a larger pickup truck or a utility van. And that total price limit is $80,000. And that leasing term is still 36 months. If you are looking to apply for More EV trucks, you may also be eligible for More EV Plus. So when we talk about how these rebates can stack, this is an example. You might use More EV used and More EV Plus, or if you're looking for a truck, you could do that as well. There are some more incentives for heavier vehicles on the More EV website, but for the sake of brevity, we will can send those links when we finish the presentation. And then for More EV trade-in, so More EV trade-in means you might have an older gas car, and you're able to trade that in and receive $1,000 as a part of this rebate. Again, you are a resident of Massachusetts, and you must be trading in an eligible older gas car. And that vehicle must still have a market value, must be at least 12 years old, and must have been registered in Massachusetts to you, the applicant, or your immediate family for at least 2 years prior to the day you are trading in. And then to receive that rebate, you would apply online. You have a period of 90 days after purchasing or leasing to submit your required documentation. And generally, you would receive this after receiving More EV standard or used at the point of sale. So this is a post-purchase rebate. And you have a 90-day period to submit that documentation after you've purchased or leased the vehicle in question. We'll talk about the pre-qualification process for both More EV used and More EV Plus. So there is a website. When you go to moreev.org, there is a big button to apply, and that is an online portal. You can create an account. It's pretty user-friendly. And you can submit your documentation on this portal. And so for the More EV Plus income qualifying rebate, only individuals may apply for that pre-qualification voucher. And this voucher must be received before purchasing or leasing a vehicle. And if you are trying to submit and get that pre-qualification voucher, you would indicate which income qualifying program you participate in, or you may submit some information such as a W-2 to confirm that your adjusted gross income falls below those income limits. You would also upload your driver's license from the state of Massachusetts. And then again, you might qualify for MORE-EV Plus. You can combine this with MORE-EV Used or MORE-EV Standard. And then for MORE-EV Used, again, only individuals can apply for this pre-qualification voucher. That is done online. It must be done before purchasing or leasing the vehicle. And you might still qualify for MORE-EV Used if you don't participate in income qualifying program based on your income and tax filing status. Again, if your adjusted gross income falls below a certain limit. So you can upload that information, and the pre-qualification voucher will confirm that you are indeed eligible. And then you can bring that pre-qualification voucher to the dealership to receive that rebate at the point of sale. Or if you'd like to receive it at tax time, you generally have a period of 90 days. We'll get on to the federal clean vehicle tax credit pretty quickly, and we'll talk about what the federal clean vehicle tax credit is. And as a disclaimer, must mention that as a part of Green Energy Consumers Alliance and as a part of the team doing outreach for MORE-EV, we cannot provide tax or accounting advice, and we always encourage consumers to consult a tax professional for any specific information that might apply to their unique situation when thinking about applying for the federal clean vehicle tax credit. So for new vehicles, there is a clean vehicle tax credit. This is up to $7,500 on eligible vehicles that meet specific battery and assembly requirements. This is valid through 2032, so it covers plug-in hybrids as well as fuel cell EVs and battery electric EVs. And the vehicle must be purchased from an IRS registered dealership. As of within the last year, there is not a finalized list of dealerships that are IRS registered. So our advice is speaking to the dealership directly and confirming they have access to the Energy Credits online portal and that they are IRS registered so that they can administer and the federal clean vehicle tax credit and their paperwork for you. There are income requirements for the tax credit, and that is $150,000 for individual filers, and then $225,000 if you are a head of household. And if you are a joint filer, that is $300,000. And I mentioned there are some specific eligibility requirements pertaining to minerals and battery components. And in terms of assembly location, starting in 2025, vehicle assembly must be taking place in North America. There is a price cap of $55,000 for sedans and hatchbacks, whereas bigger and heavier vehicles such as SUVs, vans, and pickup trucks have a limit of $80,000. And there are some sets of mineral and battery requirements as well. Oh, and we are linking as well a list of eligible cars, and that will take you directly to the fueleconomy.gov site, and you can input the model year you are thinking of, the year you are purchasing, and the site will give you a drop-down list of vehicles that qualify for the federal tax credit. Those battery and mineral requirements, as well as assembly location requirements, did get stricter every year. So that rule I mentioned about assembly taking place in North America began at the list of beginning of 2025. So that list is a little bit different than it was in 2024, but I encourage you to take a look, and that will be linked when we send the slides. And then in terms of the mineral and battery requirements, that credit amount might be split in half if a vehicle were to meet one battery requirement, or if the vehicle were to meet the qualifications of both, that would be the full $7,500. Okay. Perfect. And there is also a loophole for leasing. And then through the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, there was created a commercial vehicle tax credit, and there are not the same eligibility requirements as the clean vehicle credit. So we sometimes can refer to this as a leasing loophole. So essentially, dealerships would claim this commercial vehicle tax credit when they may acquire vehicles from their manufacturers that they will then lease. And then many dealers pass on that as savings to consumers as a either discount right off the price of the vehicle when they're choosing to lease, or in the form of lower monthly payments. So you might see that advertised if you're looking at vehicles that are on different manufacturers' websites. You might see, oh, a $7,500 upfront lease rebate. That is often comes from the commercial vehicle tax credit. And so again, I will point out that because some of those, the assembly requirement being made in the United States did come into place this past year, and some of those mineral and battery requirements do get stricter every year. Leasing is a great alternative because those battery mineral requirements are not as stringent and are not required for the commercial vehicle tax credit. So leasing is a good alternative, and we've been hearing about a lot of good and affordable lease deals lately in the last few months. And then there's also a used clean vehicle tax credit. Those battery requirements do not apply in this case. So there is a limit, a price limit, and that essentially means that the vehicle must cost less than $25,000 and be at least 2 years old. And in terms of the credit itself, that would either be $4,000 or 30% of the value of the sales price. Whichever amount is lower, the vehicle must be bought from a dealership. And there is also a lower income threshold. As you may see, that is $150,000 for joint filers, versus a $75,000 limit for individual filers. And then if you are a head of household, that is $112,000 and $112,500. In terms of claiming the credit, you might choose to transfer the tax credit liability to the IRS registered dealership, and that would be taking it at the point of sale, or you can also take the credit when filing taxes. If you do decide to receive it at the point of sale, there is a form that you must fill out. And I think we might get into that in the next slide, but we can link that form. Your dealer will have a period of 3 days to submit your information onto what's called the Energy Credits Online portal. And we always confirm checking up with the dealership as soon as possible to make sure that those steps have been done to ensure that you can receive the credit at tax time. If you choose to receive it at the point of sale and to receive cash, you might apply this towards the down payment, or you can apply the credit towards the cost of the EV. And then if taken at the time of sale, you want to assess the rebate, and this will be regardless of your tax liability for both new and used battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, since those are included as well. And it is important to note that when filing taxes, when filling out that form, I believe it's form 8936 on the IRS website, we will link it. If you are interested in receiving the tax credit at the point of sale, you can only claim up to your federal tax liability. If you have any questions about that, we're happy to address them when we do a Q&A. And I believe I already touched upon this a little bit, but you want to confirm that your expected income is under that required limit that we mentioned. And then in terms of making sure that the dealership is registered with the IRS and has access to the Energy Credits Online portal, you must speak with a salesperson or a general manager to confirm that dealership is registered with the IRS. And again, can confirm via access to the Energy Credits Online portal. And the dealership can also, if you're on the fence about purchasing from a specific dealership, you might ask the salesperson or general manager, whoever you speak to confirm that the vehicle that you are considering qualifies for the federal tax credit. And they are able to give you that confirmation if they are IRS registered, because they have access to the Energy Credits Online portal. And then after purchasing, you must receive a time of sale report submitted by the dealer and a copy of the confirmation from the IRS of successful submission onto the Energy Credits Online portal. And they do have that period of 3 days. after purchasing. So I do recommend following up with them as soon as possible, and it's essential that you receive that time of sale report. And then again, during tax season, if you are looking to receive it at tax time, that form is called Form 8936, and you must do this if you do not normally file taxes, or even if you receive it at the point of sale. So that form must be filled out if you receive it at the point of sale, or if you're looking to receive it at tax time. Again, we can make sure that form is linked if you are looking to access that tax credit. And as we move into some of our real life examples of battery electric vehicles that are available and nearby, and how we look at some of these incentives and how they stack up to add to more savings, I do want to point out our EV Finder. This is a tool that we recently revamped and improved. It's on our Drive Green website. It's a good tool to compare different EVs. This includes plug-in hybrids as well. So you can filter and sort by different criteria. If you live, well, this is for more EVs. So we all live in Massachusetts here, but if you were to live in Rhode Island, you can look at that as well. You can filter and sort by criteria like range and lowest possible cost after incentives are applied. So this will be linked as well when we send out those slides. So our first example will be a Chevy Bolt EUV. This might be a used vehicle. As we can see, the years which it was made were 2022 to 2023. We took our information from Kelley Blue Book in terms of looking at the price range. The range for this vehicle is around 257 miles, and according to Kelley Blue Book, a fair price range for the lower trim model is between $17,460 and $20,000, $20,841. And for the Chevy Bolt EUV, there are around 15 used models for sale within a 25-mile radius of Boston. So now we'll look at a real example. We took an example from a dealership that is within 25 miles from Boston, specifically from where Jamaica Plain office is located. So if you are located in a different part of Greater Boston, there might be a bigger number of Chevy Bolt EUVs available. So this was a real life example. This is a 2022 Bolt EUV, and it has mileage life of 32,286 miles. The price that it's listed as is $20,450. This meets the price limit requirement for the federal used clean vehicle tax credit. So we know that it qualifies for that $4,000 amount, and it also qualifies for more EV used. So we can subtract both of those rebates from that original price, and we can get $12,950. However, if we are income qualifying and participate in a program, or if our adjusted gross income limit falls between that income limit that we talked about, that is $1,500 off as well. And if we qualify for more EV trade-in, and if we have an old gas car that we're trading in, our final price would be $10,450. So those last two rebates may or may not, apply to your situation. And without that, we're still looking at quite reduced sales price of $12,950 for Chevy Bolt EUV. We have one more example that we'll look at as well. We also can look at a Hyundai Kona. And so the Hyundai Kona has been on the road for a while. In this case, we will look at a used Kona to highlight the more EV used. But we're taking an example. The range generally is 258 miles for the Kona, and that fair price range, according to Kelley Blue Book, is between $18,099 to $21,898. For this specific model, there are 3 used models for sale within 25 miles of Boston, particularly from the area of our Jamaica Plain office. So depending on where you are based within Massachusetts, there is a higher likelihood that there are more than 3 used Hyundai Konas available near you, or within a higher mileage radius as well. To look at a real example, this is taken from a dealership that one of those 3 that are within that 25-mile radius of us. this is a 2022, sorry, Hyundai Kona, and that has a mileage lifespan of 22,580 miles so far. It is listed as $16,900 as that price. It qualifies for the federal used tax credits. That's $4,000 off. And then if we subtract more EV used in savings, that's an additional subtraction of $3,500. So then we're left with $9,400. And if we qualify for more EV Plus, we'll subtract $1,500 to reach $7,900. And then if we qualify for more EV trade-in, that's an even smaller $6,900. So we highlighted these two car examples to show that with more EV and more EV being stackable with different subsets of rebates and the federal tax credits, when you add up all of the rebates, you can really save quite a lot. And I'd love to highlight that $9,400 is quite a big difference from $16,900. And so yeah, I encourage you to look at our EV Finder, and Kelley Blue Book is a great tool for assessing fair prices out there. We do have a used car finder as well, and we take a lot of our data from Kelley Blue Book, and we put that all in one place. And then so that really summarizes our more EV presentation. I do want to take a minute to highlight a couple of our upcoming events. We will be at Somerville's eMobility Expo tomorrow. There will be an EV showcase. So if you're in the area, I'd love to see you. We are likely hosting a EMEV ride and drive up in Pittsfield at their block party next weekend. So if you live in Western Mass and are in town for Memorial Day weekend, I'd love to see you. We also are hosting a series that covers charging. So we already covered charging basics and charging at home. Those webinar recordings are available on our website. We have our next webinar in that series, public charging and charging on the go, coming up in June. And we have another webinar going over used car market. And if you're thinking about getting an EV and are considering a used EV, that might be a good webinar to tune into. And I'll highlight one other event. If you live in the greater Boston area, we will be at the City of Boston's EV Ride and Drive. This will be later in July, and I'm still waiting for an event registration for that, or a flyer. So if you are interested, we can surely keep you in the loop, and that'll certainly be on our events page as we get closer to July. Before we move on to the Q&A, I would love to highlight our More EV survey. This helps us to assess general EV awareness in our community. It's a quick survey. I'll give maybe a couple of moments in case folks wanted to scan that QR code before we move on to the Q&A. We also have a demographic survey that we'd love to invite you to take. Through the survey, we like to assess if our clean energy programming and education is reaching a broad population. It's anonymized, and there is a chance to win some gift cards if you are interested in helping to complete the survey. I'll also spend a second before we move on to the Q&A in case any folks would like to scan the QR code. And all of these surveys, all of this information, and all of the relevant links we mentioned will be in the slides and in the email that we send out to all attendees and registrants after the webinar. And then as we move into Q&A, I invite you to email Anna or myself if you have any questions about the information that we covered today. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We'd love to stay in touch. Invite you to tune into our Drive Green community group on Facebook or join our newsletter. There's a lot happening right now. We'd love to keep in touch. Anna, do we have any questions for the Q&A?
We do.
So first of all, thank you, Caroline, for an excellent presentation. And for those of you who put questions in the chat, please do add more questions if you have them. I want to note one question was, do we share a recording of this? Yes, we do. So look out for an email from Caroline tomorrow or early next week with the slides as well as a recording of the webinar. And then secondly, somebody asked whether there'd be further discussion of charging suggestions or best practices. This webinar is really focused on the stackable incentives. We didn't have enough time to talk about charging, but as Caroline mentioned, we had 2 webinars recently, one on charging basics and then one on charging at home. And I put into the Q&A responses, the links to the recordings of those 2 webinars, as well as the link to sign up for the 3rd one in the series, which is all about charging on the go. So we hope you can join us there. In terms of open questions, I have one question about buying a used EV, whether we have data on car model battery performance. I will give a cautious yes. So historically, when we've done this webinar before, there was data available on battery degradation by vehicle model. Quite frankly, we haven't updated the slides yet, so I haven't double checked if that data is still available, but there was a tool, and I can't remember the name of the company right now, excuse me, I'll try and find it, but it showed battery degradation by vehicle year model make for some key models where there is data available. I will say that Recurrent Auto is a good resource. They have a lot of data about real life EV performance from their customers that they make public. So that will be our first stop. We use their data for our winter driving webinar where we talk about how different vehicle models fare in the cold. And I'm pretty sure that they have data on battery performance as well. So I will just say, stay tuned, come to that webinar. And by the time we have that webinar, I'll have a better answer to that question. There's a second question. Oh, actually, the question about more EV trucks. The more EV trucks does not apply. Well, actually, it applies based on vehicle weight. So some SUVs are heavy enough that they are considered more EV truck worthy and not. Caroline, I'm wondering do you mind pulling up the list of eligible vehicles for more EV trucks so we can look at that?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, the R1, the Rivian R2, the SUV version of the Rivian may qualify, but we'll just pull up the list to see. And while you're doing that, there's one question that's a little bit more policy based, so I'm going to answer this as Green Energy Consumers Alliance, not as the More EV program, but there's a question about what we think about the proposed federal tax of $250 per year on electric vehicles. If you haven't seen, this is an idea that has been put forward in legislation on the federal level, and the purported purpose is to make up for the loss of federal gas tax revenue from electric vehicles. Consumer Reports has a really good blog post on this that I'm happy to share, but we think that it is a bad idea. All the science says we need to accelerate EV adoption, but even if you take out the climate argument, the numbers just don't add up. If you look at what a comparable gas car would pay into the federal gas tax, the $250 per year on EVs is disproportionately high. And it does not address the larger question or the larger problem about transportation funding, which is we have not raised the gas tax in many, many years. So it's not gone up with inflation. So the value of the dollars that we're collecting from it has decreased over time. And construction costs on our federal roads have increased. And so those are big systemic issues that have nothing to do with EVs that need to be addressed. But this $250 per year on EVs is pretty purely political. So we definitely oppose that. But thank you, Caroline. Here's the list of vehicles that qualify for more EV truck. So would you mind scrolling down to Rivian?
Yeah.
So the R1S is an SUV. The R1T is their pickup truck. The R1S, I think, is their SUV. So there are some in there, but I think most vehicles that are SUVs don't qualify because they're not heavy enough. I do see a couple people raising their hands. We don't unmute people during webinars like this, so if you could please put your question in the Q&A chat, where we'd be happy to respond to it there. Okay, so I think we've answered all of the questions we see here in the chat. Again, if you have any further questions, I think you can email me or Caroline. We'll send out the webinar recording and slides. And I think with that, we can end this and wish you all a good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us today.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.